Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday morning worship service at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York. I'm Julie Amberg, and I am helping with the service today. I've been a member at UUCY for over 17 years, and I'm glad to be part of this spiritual faith. For some of you, you might feel, as I do, this strong need for connection during these times when we have to meet remotely. I hope that this morning's service, as well as all of the other UUCY events, help to strengthen our ties of community. In keeping with our first and second Unitarian Universalist principles to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people, as well as to work for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, today we celebrate both Indigenous Peoples Day and National Coming Out Day. Today we honor those who are the victims of European colonialism and violence, as well as those who continue to be the object of oppression and bigotry in our world. Before we begin our time together, please remember to type in the chat box any matters of the heart or candles of sharing that you would like to share with the congregation today so that Reverend Terry can read them aloud later in our service. And so we come together this morning for worship and fellowship as we greet old friends and new visitors alike. We also invite you to light a candle at home, as in keeping with our Unitarian Universalist tradition, we light a chalice as we begin our service. Our chalice lighting words today are adapted from the chalice lighting written by the Ferguson activist delegation for the service of the living tradition at the UUA General Assembly in Portland, Oregon in June of 2015. Why a flaming chalice? The question comes. It's a cup of life, we answer, a cup of blessings overflowing, a cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst, a cup of wine for celebration and dedication, the flame of truth, the fire of purification, oil for anointing, healing. Out of chaos, fear, and horror, thus was the symbol of the flaming chalice crafted for Unitarian Universalists a generation ago. So may it also be for us, a cup of life, a cup of blessings, a cup of water, and a cup of wine. In these days of division, oppression, voter suppression, fear and uncertainty, and a virus running out of control, our chalice is a light to warm our souls and guide us home. And will it ever be so?
Good morning, everybody. And once again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York Sunday morning service. My name is Reverend Terry Cummings. I'm so happy to be the minister of this congregation. Today we celebrate many days, not just National Coming Out Day and Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. But I'd like to share with you the outset a reading from the New Testament. It's a Christian reading that is often read on National Coming Out Day. It has Jesus language, but don't be alarmed. You can do this. This is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 11, verses 38 to 44. It's the scene of raising Lazarus, who had recently died from his cave. John chapter 11, verses 38 to 44. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a smell because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." On this National Coming Out Day, we wish that everyone could come out who is a member of the LGBT community. Everyone who is part of that community can come out, be unbound, and be free. In preparing for today's service, I also found that I had omitted to note that yesterday was World Mental Health Day, sponsored by the World Federation of Mental Health. And today, October the 11th, is also International Day of the Girl Child. And today is also World Perimenopause Day. All of these days have meaning for people and really for everybody everywhere. And it's too bad that we don't have the time to devote to marking and uplifting all of those important causes. Today, our principal focus will be on National Indigenous Peoples Day in honor of Columbus Day, which is tomorrow, October 12th. And to start our worship service, I'm going to invite you to enter into a short time of meditation and prayer. And at this time, I'm going to invite Grant to put a slide up on the screen to focus on. Maybe turn off your video feed in the Zoom room while we're doing this short moment of reflection, prayer, gathering, calming. So let us enter into a time, quiet space where we can reflect. Maybe adjust the position that you're sitting so your spine is straight, your body relaxed, your hands resting gently in your lap. Close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. With your eyes closed, notice what your other senses are telling you. Find that place inside you where you are most comfortable connecting to the holy. Whether the holy is the universe or God or something else. Try to find that altar within you where you hold reverence. Our prayer today is based on a prayer written by Reverend Laura Bogle of the Foothills Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Maryville, Tennessee, entitled "This is Our Home, but Not Just Ours." I invite you to listen to the prayer as you meditate, breathe slowly. Spirit of life and love, we gather today with humble hearts, grateful for the world in which we live and the land we call our nation, our commonwealth, and our home. Today we remember the care and compassion and the generous hospitality of the original peoples, indigenous peoples who lived in these lands for centuries before the arrival of our own ancestors. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. This land we live on, this water we drink, this air we breathe, these fields and woods and water that give us their healing green, the wild flowers that give us their beauty and fragrance, these fields that give us our daily bread, these stars that show us our place, the state and county parks nearby and the tame backyards, all of it our home. We remember the ancestors who have lived on this land and who have shaped it. The first peoples of the Lenape tribe and the Susquehannock-Conestoga people, the settlers, the mountaineers, the farmers, the hunters, the immigrants, the artists, the families, the explorers, the business people and engineers, the builders, the scientists, the teachers, the workers, the leaders. We inherit their choices. We honor the animals and creatures that have made their home in this land, the ones here now and the ones that used to be here. We envision the future generations who will live on in this land and let their voices fill our hearts. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours alone. I'm going to invite you just to take another couple of deep breaths and spend a few seconds in sacred silence as we enter into our worship space this morning. And now, let us all breathe together one more time and let it out as we re-enter the space. Amen. Please enjoy now our first hymn, number 1027. Cuandro el Pobre.
Cuando nombre
Our reading today was written by the Reverend Alicia Ford and is entitled, "We Are Not Guests." Am I a guest here in this house? Are you? Are we guests here in this house? And whose house do we inhabit? In the small world of our lives, the borders between us, easements, faces, gates, hedges, serve to delineate, to separate us, to remind us of where my property begins and ends, where your property begins and ends. If you cross over, you are a trespasser or a guest in my house. You've worked to own this small plot of land and the house erected on it. You've claimed it. It's now part of yourself, your definition of self, your identity. If I cross over your fences, I'm a trespasser or a guest in your house. What does it mean then that in 1845, the United States crossed over into Mexico and took half of that country, took land, resources, labor? Was the US a trespasser? Guest? Are there to be no consequences for taking what does not belong to you? Should we simply forget whose house we inhabit? To speak of hospitality and immigration often erases historical context, the actions of the past that have led us step by step into this current predicament. Professor Miguel de la Torre writes, perhaps it might be more accurate to speak of the responsibility of restitution rather than the virtue of hospitality. Hospitality in this case implies that the house belongs to us, that the land, the resources that are a part of this house is ours, and we who now live here are being virtuous in our willingness to share. It erases the history that would have us remember that those who cross the border today, those choosing to brave the harsh conditions of the desert, those who face the possibility of death, imprisonment, deportation, criminalization, are doing so because the US once crossed their borders to extract their resources and labor. It is for them a matter of survival. It is for the US a matter of restitution. The prospect of restitution is scary. Where do we begin? With Mexico? With Native Americans? With territories? With the descendants of those who were enslaved? How do we acknowledge and address the complexities of our history, present, and, if we're not conscious, future dominance? What would right relationship look like? What conditions and considerations would make restitution possible? And for us Unitarian Universalists, what would it mean for us to shake off the idea of hospitality as a central principle that is often attached to immigration and to delve into the concept of restitution? Whose house do we inhabit? For we are not hosts, we are not owners, nor are we guests. What then is our responsibility?
How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How deeply you're connected to my soul.
Some of the most momentous events in history have their beginnings in the most unlikely stories. I'd like to share with you one of those stories. So in May of 1660, a 39-year-old admiral sailed on a British Navy ship to Amsterdam to pick up the future King of England, King Charles II, who was living in Holland in exile. On the return trip home, the admiral and the king struck up a friendship. And after the king was installed, the admiral, who was quite a wealthy man, having served both sides in the English Civil War that was just ended a few years earlier, the admiral lent the British king considerable sums of money. In 1680, 10 years after the admiral's death, the admiral's son, William Penn, went to the king and asked for the debt to be repaid. The admiral's name was Sir William Penn, the father of William Penn, who I thought Pennsylvania was named after. William Penn asked for the king to repay the debt by giving him all of the lands that we now know as the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the king agreed. Originally, William Penn wanted to call our state New Wales, but the King's Privy Council objected. So William Penn suggested that it be called Sylvania, which means from the forests. The Privy Council, the King's Council, agreed, except that they put the word Penn in front of it and named the land Pennsylvania, not after William Penn, but after Admiral Sir William Penn, the boy's father. See, if you tune into the UUCY Sunday morning services, chances are you will learn something new. I really didn't know that until I researched this homily for today. Of course, no one thought to ask the several thousand Native Americans who were living in Pennsylvania what they thought about the new owner taking over their lands. The land included several thousand Lenape and Susquehannock people, and they had lived here for centuries, calling this place their home. It wasn't unusual, though, to ask Native Americans what they thought about their lands being given to the favorite subjects of foreign European kings and princes. The practice had been going on for hundreds of years without any regard to the feelings of the indigenous people who lived there. And in the almost 2 centuries that elapsed between Columbus landing in the Bahamas on October the 11th, 1492, and the king giving William Penn title to Pennsylvania in 1680, millions of indigenous people in the New World had been slaughtered, enslaved, or killed by European diseases. First by the British, then the Dutch and other European colonists. Following the light of the sun, we left the old world. Christopher Columbus is supposed to have written about the voyage of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria in 1492. It's unlikely that he ever said that, though, because when he set out, he thought he was heading for the Spice Islands of the East Indies, not for a new world. He didn't know the new world existed or that the world he was living in was the old one. After finding the Bahamas, Columbus visited other Caribbean islands, including Cuba and the island of Hispaniola, which today is Santo Domingo and Haiti. He arrived back in Spain in early 1493, bringing with him a number of captive indigenous people with him. Word of his voyage soon spread throughout Europe, and within a few years, the devastation of the West Indies, Mexico, and South America by fortune hunters and missionaries had begun. Until fairly recently, Columbus was romanticized as a famous explorer who discovered America, but his brutality and his legacy of genocide have caused people to rethink celebrating Columbus Day. And a number of states and dozens of cities around the country now celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead. Pennsylvania is not one of them. Under Columbus's governance, the indigenous people of Hispaniola was almost exterminated as a result of mistreatment, European diseases, and enslavement. Columbus, though, was a man of his times, and his successors were no less brutal in their treatment of the peoples they encountered in the New World. In 1542, a priest named Bartolomé de las Casas, who had spent 50 years traveling in the West Indies soon after they were discovered by Columbus, wrote a short book entitled A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, which he sent to Prince Philip II of Spain with an entreaty to intervene in behalf of the native peoples. In his book, de las Casas described the horrible acts of genocide and torture, enslavement and suffering inflicted on the native people by the Spanish. No matter where he visited, they were committing the same crimes. On Hispaniola, he witnessed the Spanish herding native peoples into a straw building and setting it on fire, killing the occupants. In one village, he wrote, "They sent the males to the mines to dig and bring away the gold, which is an intolerable labor. But the women they made use of to manure and till the ground, which is a toil most irksome even to men of the strongest and most robust constitutions, allowing the women no other food but herbage and such kind of unsubstantial nutriment, so that nursing women's milk dried up and the young infants lately brought forth all perished. In a few short years, de las Casas reported, the combined population of Puerto Rico and Jamaica was reduced from 600,000 people to scarcely 200 people. De las Casas wrote about native peoples committing suicide to avoid enslavement by the Spanish. His accounts of cruelty may have been slightly exaggerated to gain the attention of his royal audience, but there's no disputing the rapid and drastic reduction in the size of native populations in the decades immediately following Columbus's discovery of the West Indies. And de las Casas was not a saint by modern standards. While he was empathetic with the native peoples of those islands, he also advocated for the importation of African Americans to provide labor in the plantations. All of the suffering inflicted by the Spanish in their lust for gold and treasure was accompanied by the goal of converting native peoples to Catholicism. By enslaving them, they would not only be improved, they would be saved for eternity that comes in the hereafter. It wasn't just the Spanish who believed they were doing people a favor by taking over their lands. I remember growing up in the UK in the 1970s, and my history teachers explaining to me the background to the British Empire. And I remember how they lifted up the fact that the UK, my country, had brought democracy to 2/3 of the world. Imperialism was a good thing, I was taught. And it was much later in life before I started to question the ravaging of the colonies my country took over, taking not just slaves, but minerals and other natural resources. All this so that we could bring them our version of democracy as if they needed us to do it in the first place. And the United States is still doing it today. I remember when our country invaded Iraq during the Bush administration. George Bush wrote a famous memo to Condoleezza Rice. "Let freedom reign," he wrote, as the troops invaded that country. We were doing it to save them, not to save ourselves. And indigenous people the world over have historically had their lives turned upside down by men in rooms hundreds or thousands of miles away, usually white men, drawing lines on maps, lines that separate families. The 38th parallel division between North and South Korea was come up with by 2 army officers in the Pentagon. The line between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is an arbitrary line drawn up in London and separates families on both sides of that line, as does the line between the American and the Mexican border. So what became of the indigenous people of Pennsylvania after William Penn took over? According to historical sources, William Penn believed strongly that the people they called Indians should be treated fairly. He traveled to the interior of what was then a colony and befriended different Native American tribes, the story goes. He insisted that Native Americans be paid a fair price for any land that was purchased from them. Legend has it that William Penn made a treaty with the Lenape Indians in 1683, the Treaty of Shakamaxon, under which Penn and the chief of the Lenape agreed that their people would live in a state of perpetual peace. The treaty was apparently signed in what is now somewhere in downtown Philadelphia. The site of the treaty was a historic meeting place along the Delaware River, used by the Lenape that was located within Philadelphia. We can't prove the existence of that treaty, and rumor has it that Penn's sons ripped it up and destroyed it because they were less scrupulous than him. They ripped up the treaty in order to renege on it. The other main tribe in Pennsylvania, the Susquehannock, occupied land along the Susquehanna River from the north end of the Chesapeake Bay all the way up to New York State and west, possibly as far as Ohio. They certainly were present in York County. Penn was unsuccessful in signing a treaty with them. They were members of the Iroquois Nation, and the relationships were much more complicated. But by 1763, the population of the Susquehannock had been reduced to just 20 people, ravaged by disease. These 20 people met a very violent end when a gang of vigilantes called the Paxton Boys massacred them in 1763 as a reprisal for an Indian uprising in the Midwest. An early example of vigilantism and white supremacy that has marked our country since its birth. In 1879, an Army officer named Richard H. Pratt opened a boarding school for Indian youth in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. His goal, to use education to uplift and assimilate Native children into the mainstream of American culture. That year, 50 Cheyenne, Kiowa, Pawnee arrived at his school. He cut their hair, made them speak English, and prohibited any display of their tribal traditions or native culture. His motto, kill the Indian and save the man. The model of the Carlisle Indian School was copied by other schools around the country, separating Native American children from their parents and families in order to strip them of their heritage. And I just couldn't help but think when I was preparing my homily for today, how little change things are in 2020. Far from going away from vigilantism and white supremacy, they are alive and well. Native Americans and other indigenous people still suffer from discrimination and lack of economic opportunity and resources, as do many brown and black people in our country, members of the LGBTQ community, in particular black trans women, still experience violence, hatred, vigilantism. This past week, a clergy colleague of mine, after the vice presidential debate, said something to me that really hit the nail on the head. She said, we can't expect to make progress against bigotry and violence from the top down anymore, as our democratic institutions are just too flawed. What we have to do is do the work from the ground up, having one-on-one conversations with as many people as possible. That will be hard work, and it will take some time, but we must do it. Small things add up, like removing Confederate flags from public places, like celebrating Indigenous peoples for their inherent worth and dignity rather than their oppressors. And near and dear to my own heart, ensuring that the curricula of history classes taught in our schools don't omit the facts of what really happened and no longer extol the virtues of what, by our standards today, are history's real villains. It is time to set sail by the light of the sun and leave the old world behind. Let us celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, not Columbus Day, from now on. May it be so. We come now to that part of our service where we share joys and concerns with one another. And in the spirit of sharing, just a reminder that we do encourage you to continue to give online to our weekly Sunday offering. Our church's needs are continuing, and the needs of our Share the Plate partner also are continuing. So I ask you to give as generously as you can by following the instructions that were given in the announcement last Friday. A candle for all of our unspoken joys and concerns. May the joys be magnified and the concerns and sorrows diminished by the sharing. Thank you so much, Julie. I'd like to share some closing words. Benediction. Benediction means good word. 528 years ago, the world was changed forever. The discovery of the Americas by people from Europe or Asia was surely inevitable. But the violent death of millions of indigenous peoples was not. If acts of genocide are forgotten, they are more likely to be repeated. And so, instead of celebrating a romantic and false version of history, instead of hiding from the reality of history and the human story that unfolded in the past, we engage in a responsible search for truth and meaning. Let the truth never be left out of the story that is told of the discovery of the Americas. Let us never forget the enslavement of both indigenous peoples and African peoples. Let us never forget the oppression of members of the LGBTQ community, or that women have yet to realize the right to be equal partners, equal standing in this world. Let us find truth and meaning for our own time from the mistakes of the past, so that we can build a fairer, safer, and more just world for the future. May it be so.
As our Sunday worship draws to a close, we extinguish our chalice. Please feel free to follow along the reading on the reading the words on the screen as we extinguish our chalices here in the sanctuary and at home. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thank you, Julie. And just a few closing announcements. First of all, I'd like to express sincere gratitude to Julie Amberg, Doug Hober, Robert Felton, and Grant de Guzman for their work in bringing you the service this morning, as well as to Gretchen Decker, who's sitting here quietly at the back of the sanctuary. Couple of announcements. I'm going to be posting on the Facebook page, it may be up already, our public Facebook page, some information about UU the Vote activities. The last day to register to vote in Pennsylvania is October 19th. That's just a week away. Some information will be put up on our Facebook page as to how you can help participate in some text banks and phone banks this coming week. And I encourage you to do so. It's so important that people register to vote and actually turn out to vote. Couple of other announcements. Fall cleanup. Next Saturday, October the 17th, from 8:30 to 12:30. Deb Lord has asked that people please help. The fall cleanup is scheduled next weekend, and your help is needed for all of that or part of that time. If it rains, cleanup will be November the 7th. Please feel free to contact Deb Lord for further information. Donations are now being accepted for the UUCY 2020 auction. The auction website is accepting donations again through October 19th and may include dinners, hikes, vacation rentals, kids' activities, art, jewelry, gift baskets, and many other types of things and experiences. This year, you are encouraged to make donations that allow for social distancing, such as outdoor events, takeout dinners, gifts, and services. And more information about that was posted on the website and is in the email blast that went out to you last week. And I think that that is it for our announcements for this week. And with that, I wish you a great week. May your roots grow deep. May your branches grow wide. Our worship is ended. Our service begins right now. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next Sunday.
The peace of the earth.